to our talk on the cavalry. Our focus is on mounted couriers and staff officers. But first, we wanted to tell you a little bit about the cavalry and the different roles that the cavalry had. So the roles are as described in the different manuals. First is reconnaissance, screening, covering the Army's flanks and rear, employment of shot charges, interdicting lines of supply and communication, and support of headquarters. So if we were in a cav class back then, we would have been taught this at West Point, and it would have been reconnaissance, screening, covering the Army's flanks and rear, employment of shock charges, and interdicting lines of supply and communication, and support of headquarters, where we mostly see the mounted couriers and staff officers. Well, first, reconnaissance, to gather reliable information of the enemy's movement and his intentions, which is absolutely imperative in order to successfully conduct the campaign. We have to know where the enemy is in order to develop a plan of attack. Cavalry, as the eyes and ears of the Army, is best equipped to accomplish this mission, since it is mounted and able to sweep large areas of terrain in a relatively short period of time. A practical application of this principle could be seen in a tactical a number of years ago at Cedar Creek. Now, the cavalry was able to detect the Rebs trying to move in on our flank early in the morning. The federal commander was notified of this fact, and he was able to shift retreat to meet the challenge. During the Peninsular Campaign, Lieutenant George Armstrong did an important reconnaissance across the Chickahominy River that came to the attention of General McClellan. Custer also had acted as a guide and aide to General Hancock at the Battle of Williamsburg. So, and because of his scouting and bravery at the Battle of Williamsburg, Custer was made a captain and ended up on General McClellan's staff. Another role of cavalry is screening. And screening, as Jeb Stuart did as Lee marched north in the Gettysburg campaign. Stuart effectively thwarted the Union Army by defending the various gaps that led into the Shenandoah Valley. The Union Army and Union cavalry was finally able to climb to the top of the Blue Ridge after a series of very hard-fought battles at Aldie, Middleburg, and Upperville, to see Lee's army all stretched out on the valley floor below, heading north, but it took some time. The cavalry also screens the withdrawal as well as the advance of the army. General William Woods Averill, a notable cavalry officer, said that another important role of cavalry is to cover the Army's flanks and its rear. The infantry has the front when locked in combat, where our firepower is centered, but the flanks are vulnerable to attack. And we know this very well from fighting our brethren in gray over many years. The flank is always sought after. On the march, cavalry forms in advance and provides flank and rear guards, supplies escorts, couriers, and guides. During the winter of 1863-1864, the cavalry was tasked with mounting a huge circular perimeter around the entire Army of the Potomac, near Brandy Station, Culpeper, and Stevensburg. It was made up of vedettes, and a vedette, as you well know, is mounted sentinels. And they were positioned at regular intervals, acting as pickets. It was extremely hard work, and it was very tough on both the troopers and their horses. Shock charges, another one of the roles of the cavalry. So shock charges against the enemy's infantry in order to rout them is another one of the duties. We saw a prime example of this, of a shock charge, at the Shenandoah 1864 reenactment, where General Brennan sent our cavalry straight against the rebel line. Their line was somewhat disordered at a certain point on that Saturday of the engagement. We, the infantry, had hammered them unmercifully, and at the critical point, General Brennan sent the cavalry in at the charge. I could feel the force of that charge as they rushed by. It was a brilliant moment, and the Rebs were broken as they were forced to rush down the hill their line had been centered on. Chris Andrews and his boys heard the thundering hooves coming towards them so quickly, they just panicked. They ran. They told us they only had one option, and that was retreat, and retreat at a very fast gait. It was a bully moment. The next role for cavalry is interdicting lines of supply and communication. And a good example of this is Grierson's raid in 1863 during the Vicksburg campaign. Grierson actually hated horses. He hated them since one had kicked him in the face when he was a young man. But his commission was to the cavalry. He really wanted infantry, but the commission was to cavalry, and that's where he went. The movie The Horse Soldiers by John Ford gives you an idea of disrupting lines of supply and communications. Ignore the uniforms and 90% of the rest, and you'll get the idea. But it does show what happens disrupting lines of communication and supply. In actuality, Grierson at Newton Station destroyed 2 locomotives, 25 freight cars, filled with commissary stores and artillery shells destined for the garrison of Vicksburg, and over 500 muskets. Also destroyed were bridges, trestle works, and telegraph wire. The last major role of the horse soldier was support of headquarters, and this more or less is what we are talking about, which employed couriers and mounted officers. And there are 2 good examples of this at the last 2 Cedar Creeks, where Ted Brennan was a commanding officer. General Brennan had at his disposal 2 to 3 couriers at each of those battles, and he used them well. During the battles, he had them moving artillery pieces and infantry battalions across the battlefield. The couriers would be dispatched with orders, and they would plunge down the hills at a rapid gait, delivering the orders and then racing back, thundering across the hills for the next set of orders. It was pretty exciting. And it was an impressive sight and proved the effectiveness of using mounted couriers and officers attached to the staff. Now, the courier has a lot of responsibilities. He must keep his wits about him. He must accurately deliver the orders from the command staff and know to whom the order is to be delivered, no matter whether that is a written or an oral order. It is a major responsibility. Now, the National Regiment was at Newmarket a number of years ago. We had been put in place on a woods trail that led directly to the Confederate left flank. It was a perfect position, and we hunkered down to await the beginning of the battle. We kept our traps on, stacked arms, lounged about. Mind you, keeping a clear eye on our rebel brethren. A few fellows were detailed to that. Some of the boys even started to cook coffee. The Rebs had no idea we were on this rocky trail concealed by woods all around. It was a perfect place to launch a surprise flank attack. Well, amidst all of this pre-battle tranquility, a mounted courier came galloping up asking for Colonel Downs. He said the acting general wanted us to be down off of our position and to meet him on a fence line in the middle of the field. Being good soldiers, we obeyed, led by our gallant Colonel Downs. When we got down to the point, we saw something going on. It was a bit of a commotion and confusion when we got to that fence line. The acting general was actually dressing down the courier in a number of sharp words. It was a mistake, but the error was corrected, and we marched back to our original position on the Confederate flank. Our countermarch, while very realistic, showed the value of accurately delivering orders. It was a hot May day, but we all kind of said to ourselves, well, this probably happened during the war, and it did. When the battle began, Colonel Downs sent us down on the rebel flank with a hearty cheer. We rolled the Rebs up like a wet blanket. It was a brilliant charge, and we won the day. We actually captured about 25 to 30 Rebs, who Sergeant Rich Miller alone guarded while the attack continued. And that is a story for another time. During the war, assignment as a mounted courier or staff officer undoubtedly conferred much prestige on the individual soldier. But on the march, couriers and staff officers alike might have to ride alone or only with a small escort through enemy territory. And they risk life and limb crossing back and forth across the battlefield to deliver orders and messages. Well, mounted couriers and staff officers made a major contribution to the war effort, and they were very significant. Remember, mounted, you have a better vision of the battlefield, which adds to command and control, which can be relayed back to the command staff. Also, you were a more visible target. And it should be noted that during the war, it is estimated that 1 million horses were destroyed, as well as 700,000 soldiers who became casualties. So, fully for the mounted arm of the Union Army, for those mounted couriers and staff officers. And now, Warren will show us how to saddle a horse with a proper equipage as he begins his job as a mounted courier. Thank you, boys.
What's next? What's first? Share screen.
I don't know. Is that what they're telling you to do?
Yeah,
Say anything first?
Right, share screen. Okay.
Tell them the host is disabled.
The host has disabled me from sharing. I have to. All right.
Do they know how to do it?
Still disabled.
Hey, Dan, I can't seem to allow him to do it on my end.
Go to security settings.
Security settings.
Go to the security settings, the host screen. It's at the bottom.
Let's see. There you go.
And then there's a button in there.
Try it now, Warren.
There we are.
Okay, click on the video. Click the bottom
Share.
share, sound, share,
Here. Okay, folks, here we go.
and then start your video. It's ready to go.
Pennsylvania Reserves, Company K. I'm sure you've enjoyed the first part of the presentation on Horses in Combat in the Civil War by Captain McNerney. This is the second part. This is more of a hands-on. I'm here at my riding stable, Hayes Equestrian, and I'm with my horse, Elf. I'm going to take you through the basic equipment that a courier or dispatch rider used. Captain McNerney and I have been working on a portrayal now for over a year, writing, research, documentation, buying equipment. Captain McNerney's current aide was wounded in our last battle, and he's recovering in hospital. Captain went down the line, asked if anybody knew how to ride a horse. I raised my hand. I was drafted in to be his rider. As a dispatch rider, I'm not cavalry. I don't have a sword. I have just a basic belt, cap pouch I'm wearing, and a Remington Army revolver for personal protection. My job would be to relay messages between Captain McNerney and Colonel Downs at the command staff. Captain McNerney and I hope to introduce this aspect to the National Regiment at select events with the command staff's approval in the near future. It'll add something new, exciting, and different to an already great organization. Now for the nuts and bolts. I'm here with my horse. He's been groomed. I have this halter on. Its halter is a collar, and there's a lead line or lead strap off the halter. When dismounted, this is the collar and strap allows me to walk my horse around and guide it. He's already been curry-combed, brushed, and had his shoes picked. So we're just going to start right in with mounting him up for battle. This is a reproduction issue Civil War cavalry blanket. This goes over the horse to protect him from the saddle. At night, I would cover the horse with this. If it was warm weather, I'd use it to cover myself. So, we get in here. I put the blanket up on him, like so. Make sure it's just behind the withers. Take a quick look. Make sure I've got it good from side to side, because we don't want the horse to get chafed. All consideration in cavalry is for the horse first, the rider second. If your horse got injured, you were useless. Now that looks pretty good. Next is the saddle. Saddle I have here is a reproduction 1859 Mcclellan Saddle. General Mcclellan designed this saddle for cavalry use. And with minor modifications, this saddle stayed with the United States Army up until about World War II in various forms. The tree, or the frame, is hard leather. As you can see here, it's got side skirts and
Stirrups.
to put your feet in. Thank you. Now, I've got this set up for battle. I've gone campaign since I've been plucked out of the ranks. My blanket is rolled up behind the saddle with the blanket straps. I might have a shirt, personal items, socks in there. My rubber blanket is on top of that so I can get it if it rains. My frock coat or gray coat's rolled up on the front of the saddle in case the weather gets cold. This is it. This is campaign style on horseback. Now to get the saddle on the horse. I'll explain this as we go along. Now we've got the saddle on. You can see it's getting loaded up quite a bit already. With everything in place, my fenders are in place. Everything is hanging down nice. Perhaps a little pinch right here. Make sure you're not wearing on the withers of the horse. Next, we'll get everything else adjusted. First order of business is the breast collar. This goes around the front of the horse, as you can see. The end of the strap passes through a ring on the saddle. Comes back down. What this is for, this secures the saddle from moving backwards in combat. It's all nice and centered. Next we would have the end. This is the girth strap. This passes underneath the horse, and that secures the saddle to the animal. Very important. And the lead strap from the breast collar goes over the girth, so it's all interlocked. Then we pass the strap through, bring it up to the ring, and we'll do this 2 or 3 times until it's wrapped up nice and well. Easy there, Elf. Now we'll snug this up for now, but before it actually mount and ride off, I give it one last check. The horse will lose some air, and you want this extremely snug. You don't want it to fall off or have the saddle shift. Cavalry also use an additional girth strap called a surcingle. This was just a secondary strap or a backup strap. Now we're going to ride soon. This goes directly over the top of the saddle. It could be leather or fabric or both. This is a combination of both. You want to make sure this is just resting straight on the saddle. This also helps to stabilize the saddle and distribute the rider's weight. So you want to get this in underneath all the other strapping so it's directly to the horse. The wider part goes on top where the rider is. You bring this around, snug it up. And there's a couple loops for it to pass through. And once you get it initially snugged up, you can move it around to where you want and then tighten it up. But I'm going to take this off for now because we got a lot of equipment on the horse to go over. But we would use this in combat for riding. Now, since I'm infantry and I transferred over to cavalry, I'm bringing my accoutrements with me. My canteen, I want handy. So I'm going to loop it over the front and let it hang down the other side. My haversack, I want to bring with me as well. I'm going to loop that around my blanket roll in the back, have that hang down on this side. So I've got water, I've got my personal items with me, I've got everything here I need. Last, we're going to put bridle and bit on. I'm going to have a little assistance from my riding instructor here.
So putting the reins up first,
Reins over the back.
and then with this part, we lower it down to him. And he's sometimes,
He's used to a nose bridle.
yeah, so we're gonna come down to Boyle.
Come on, buddy.
I know, this is weird.
Yeah.
I know.
There we go.
I'm gonna need to make this a little bigger.
Towards my side too.
Yeah, go down 2 holes.
We're all set there. Now, once we're all set, I'm going to take my lead line, pass it up through the saddle, and pass it down through,
I know.
pass it down through another attachment point. You want a little looseness in the lead line so the horse could turn his head, but you also want it secured to the saddle so it doesn't come flopping off. There we are. So, we're all set now to go off to report to headquarters staff, see Colonel Downs, Captain McNerney. I hope you've enjoyed this little bit of video. Thank you. Come on, Elf.
Like, stop sharing.
All right, thank you, Warren. Does anybody have any questions for Warren or for Mark? Okay, Mr. Dunning.
I had one quick question. Is the horse's name really Elf?
Yeah, yes, it is. It's my instructor's horse. His name is really Elf. I knew this would come up.
I'm glad. No problem.
No,
I'm
no,
good.
it's
Thank
re-
you.
No, it's really Elf. I don't make that stuff up.
Until he got to the bit, it was he wasn't acting like Elf, but then he redeemed himself.
Well, I'd like to comment on that briefly. The Elf is my instructor's horse. He's used to a nose bit, or what's called a hackamore. He's not used to a mouth bit. We didn't know how he'd react to it, so that's why she stepped in and helped me, because you can see she struggled with it a little bit. And a lot of horses are sensitive to that, Ted, because, you know, teeth problems or something else. But it all went well, and I'm right now I'm off looking for Colonel Downs and Mark McNerney.
Outstanding. Richard Dunning, I think you had a question.
No, I don't. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Anybody else?
Ted, just wanted to mention this. Just wanted to mention, I guess you can't see it, but this book is called The Union Cavalry Comes of Age by Eric Wittenberg. And this guy is pretty good if anybody wants to study a little bit about the cavalry. And a guy that did a lot of the maps for him was John Heiser. So
Oh, excellent.
just a little extra.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much, gentlemen.
There's a question somewhere, Ted.
Bruce has his hand up.
Yeah, I had a question for Mark. Mark, have your recent experiences persuaded you to return to the infantry?
Well, we got to, because my wife is listening to this right now. Yes, yeah, I don't know if everybody knows it or not, but I broke my shoulder doing a little riding. So, you know, like General Patton probably broke every bone in his body. So if you're real into this, I guess you gotta get busted up and heal again and keep going for it. But I'm mostly an infantry officer, so don't worry, I'll be with the company.
That's all we want. Thank you. And this was great, both you guys. I really enjoyed your presentations.
I have one comment, everybody. If you haven't ridden a horse, you're on a 1,000-pound animal with a mind of his own. You're not only trying to control him, but to manage yourself in battle. Accidents do happen. All kidding aside, Mark had one. I haven't had one yet, but if and when that day comes for me, I hope I have enough backbone to get right back on the horse like Mark did. So I admire him for that.
Outstanding, outstanding.
I have a
Okay.
question.
Oh, who has a question?
I have a question real quick.
Okay, go ahead.
So I've understood, although I don't ride, I've understood in the past, you have to tighten that belt that goes around the horse's girth several times because they'll take a deep breath.
Well,
Is that
I
true?
mentioned that in there. I snugged it. I said, if you caught it, I commented on that. I'll check it again before I ride because they lose air. You'll snug it up and it'll seem really snug. And you'll get ready to mount and you can get like 2 fingers under it. So you pull it up, the horse gets used to it. Or sometimes they'll blow it out on purpose because they feel the pressure. The last thing you do before you actually mount up is you pull the heck out of it, really tighten it up. That's what keeps you on the horse. And periodically riding, you should check it as well. It's one of those mystery things that'll just loosen up. But I don't want anybody to worry. When Mark and I are together, I'll keep an eye on them.
Thanks, Warren.
Okay.
That's what I'm there for.
Okay. Paul Martinello.
Not a question, but Warren, you mentioned that the Mcclellan Saddle was thick or stiff or hard leather. It's actually a wood-shaped.
Rawhide.
It's wood underneath, and they put leather over the top.
Yeah, it's a tree. Well, I didn't want to get into it too much, Paul, because there's a lot of terms there that may or may not be of interest to people. But it's called a wooden tree. It's covered with rawhide. We could have a whole separate class on the construction of a saddle.
I never knew that, so I thought it was just leather. But
Not well. I went over it briefly because that's one of those things that's nice to know, but it may not be need to know. But interesting, like I said, it stayed with the United States Army up until about World War II. The last cavalry charge was on the Bataan Peninsula by mounted Army officers with 45 automatics and sabers charging a Japanese column. That was the last cavalry charge in American history.
thanks, Warren.
Okay. Anybody else?
I have
Okay.
one.
Who's I?
Brandon Kelly.
Okay, Brandon, go ahead.
I was curious, Warren, with your revolver, have you had to use it on horseback yet? And if so, is it a little bit challenging to use, focusing on the horse and then making sure your weapon's working properly?
Well, that's a Remington Army percussion revolver. I haven't, that's Civil War era. I haven't used it yet at a Civil War event, but when I was at the Little Bighorn, I had a Colt revolver and a trapdoor carbine, and I used the revolver a lot on horseback as well as the carbine. Your horse has to be what's called gun trained, and that's a subject we could go on about, but I was firing the revolver on horseback, the carbine on horseback, and you haven't lived until you're at a gallop with about 600 Indians after you. But we fired off a horseback quite a bit, and it's really a rush. But yeah, we have just a different revolver.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, gentlemen, let's, if we have any more questions for Warren and Mark, we can hold them for another time because we do have to move on here.